Welcome. Good morning. I am Mrs. Hopkins, and we're talking with Jeevan and I'm sorry, I practice and practice. Anandasakaran, Mr.
Yeah, Anandasakaran.
Anandasakaran. Okay, sorry. And he is a senior application developer with the University of Washington, and he's here to tell us all about your job. So I just want to tell you before we get started that our webinar is being recorded, so other students can watch it in the future. We'll have about 30 minutes to talk, and we'll be monitoring your questions as they come in. So let's get started. Thank you, Jeevan, for joining us today. And tell us all about yourself and your job as a senior application developer.
Cool. So I've been a programmer for 21 years, 6 years as a senior application developer for the University of Washington. I'm also the founder of Wave Networks Web Hosting. That's my own personal company. Mostly programming web applications. For the university, I created 3 applications so far. One is, sorry to lose my voice. One is activity tracking software called Rise. And Rise is, so we work with medical researchers who work on thousands of projects every year. Hold on 1 second. I don't know what has happened there. Okay, so we work with researchers and research projects on what's called the CTSA grant from the National Institute of Health. And so what we do is we support researchers who are taking their research and getting it into hospitals. So that's what translational research means. And so with all the money that we get from the NIH, we have to track everything we do with it, who we do it for, what research it's supporting. So I wrote the software that actually does that record keeping, and it's the Rise application, and that's what you see here on the left. Also, when people do clinical trials, you actually have to schedule patients into beds. So a researcher might be doing like a COVID study, and they have 20 participants, and they all have to be scheduled to come into the hospital, get into a bed, and have whatever procedure needs to happen. And so you only have so many beds, and you got thousands of research projects. So I wrote a piece of software that actually allows the nurses to schedule these patients into beds. And then I also do mobile application development. So every so often, a researcher wants to test a new technology. So mobile applications being one, and can it help? In this case, when somebody gets a diagnosis with some genetic variant, it's often really good that they share it with their family. So they wanted to see if we created a mobile app for people to do that, would that help people actually share this data with their family? So I created that for them specifically for this research project. So a lot of times these are very short window projects that these applications live for a very small window, and just to see if something would work or not. Not necessarily to start a company around, but just to see if the technology would help. And so that was like this project so let's go to the next slide. So I program primarily in the PHP programming language. It's been around forever. It's what like Facebook was developed in. It runs on a web server called Apache, which is all open source. I use MySQL for my databases, which is now MariaDB, since the open source community moved it after Oracle purchased MySQL. And we run Linux servers, and Linux, especially in its enhanced security environment. So it's like normal Linux, just a lot harder to use. And for my software, as you'll see later, I started out my career as a graphic artist. So I live in Adobe Creative Suite, and I started out as a 3D animator, went to art school, and that whole bit before I became a programmer. So I use Photoshop, Illustrator, Dreamweaver for my coding, which I'm probably the only engineer on the planet that does that. And I use Putty on PC for SSH, and on my Mac, I use the native terminal. And so I noticed on the questions you want to see like where I work. And so this is my home office. I'm a big fan of monitors and lots of them. And so I just believe that if you do this for your work and you spend hours and hours a day in front of a computer, you need to invest in a really good setup.
Yeah, I do love my dual monitors. It's
Yeah.
it's hard to just work on one screen. Love it.
Yeah, and so just like I said, it's like I actually started out as a 3D animator because, you know, I started out in 3D when I was 12, right? So I was just on my computer wanting to make TV shows and stuff. And so it seemed pretty natural. I went to Art Institute of Seattle. But while I was in the Art Institute of Seattle, you know, everybody who wants to work at Pixar tries to figure out what their best way in is, whether that's picking up coffee for somebody, being somebody's personal assistant or whatever. So my idea was I'm going to learn this IT thing, and that will be my in to Pixar or ILM or something. So, but in the meantime, I got hired at Amazon in 1998. So that was, and I quickly just became an IT guy because I realized I could make more money doing this. And then while I was Amazon, I taught myself how to code, and later on just made that transition from IT manager to web developer. And I put this picture of this book because these books is exactly how I learned to program PHP. They're like $4 little pocket references you can get off Amazon, and they're just not scary and very easy, and you get little bite-sized chunks. And so one of the questions that was in the document I got was basically other ways to get into the industry. So a lot of people ask the questions like, why should I go into a boot camp? Should I teach myself? Do I need to go get a degree in computer science? And that's really all dependent on which path you want to go down. If you really wanted to get into the real computer science stuff, then the degree is the best way to go. But that's because you want to be working on better processors, new ways to make algorithms more efficient, invent new technologies, right? You really need to know the whole stack to, you know, the people who invented machine learning. Like, you can go to a coding boot camp and learn how to use machine learning, but you won't learn how to invent something like that in one of those coding boot camps. Coding boot camps are great for, you're going to learn exactly what you need to get a job somewhere. Like go get a job at Google, and go get a job at Amazon, go get a job at Netflix. It's definitely less expensive, it's quicker, but it just doesn't have that depth in the underlying hardware stack. But I included the DIY stuff, like, so I'm self-taught, but in either of these paths, whether you go on a coding boot camp or you do computer science, you are required to teach yourself. It's very rare that you're going to go into your computer science class and learn a ton of new stuff. And the industry changes so fast that if you're not learning by yourself, you just kind of get left behind. And it all depends in your job if you want to just be the guy who does the task work instead of the guy who or gal that develops the new vision, the new mission, or the new products for your company. And so that's really the difference. And so I know a lot of people say it's hard to learn on your own, or it's hard to learn out of a book, but it's a skill that's worth developing, even if you don't have it, because it's just the best way to go. And either of these things, it's like college alone, boot camp alone is not enough. And so with that, just in case anybody was interested in a programming career, and what you want to do. So I learned PHP, JavaScript, HTML, and so all my stuff is on the web. I can do mobile apps because there are pathways to do mobile apps that way. But you know, if you want to learn games, you know, the Unity game engine is very inexpensive to get, and that'll teach you C++. in a really fun way, because programming games is fun. It's just a lot of work. If you want to program like the next Facebook and web applications, then PHP, I believe, is the way to go. But a lot of people are using React and Node. Everybody who I know who learns programming now starts with Python. And if you want to do mobile apps, React is a good one. But if you're doing mobile games, Unity does both. So if I was somebody in high school right now and I wanted to get into gaming and programming games, definitely Unity was the way to go. And there's plenty of literature and websites and YouTubes out there for learning how to program in Unity. And that's all I got for my presentation. Any questions?
Yeah, there was, lost it.
There's a question in here. What do you do as a programmer? Would it be better to go to college or trade school for stuff like cybersecurity? If you want to ever teach cybersecurity in your future, then I would do it in college. If you want to learn cybersecurity, there's one book that you have to read, and it's called Sharks in the Moat.
Sharks.
And that's probably the best book on cybersecurity. And if you read that stuff through, it'll give you a good place to start. There's also a website called OWASP. And I don't remember what it stands for, but it's a great place to start on how to secure your application. And they actually have a piece of code that I actually went through a class last week, where it's an application you can run in a Docker container, and it starts up and it's like this OWASP juice shop, and you get prizes for hacking into it. So basically you start hacking it and it has a scoreboard, and the more hacks you can do, the better. And that's a great way to learn cybersecurity. And if you choose to do cybersecurity, you're going into a very challenging field. It's like a never-ending struggle to secure your stuff, because people are always trying to figure out ways to hack it. And in what I do for a living in the medical side, people are trying to get at that data all the time. And there's so many fines and regulations and HIPAA compliance stuff that, it's a little nerve-wracking to build an application. Everybody wants you to say it's secure, and it was like going, well, it's as secure as we can make it, but we don't know what's going to come out later, that somebody's going to figure out a vulnerability in SSH or the vulnerability in the latest certificates. I just try to be as thorough as possible and really overcompensate for like security. Like I use probably higher security standards than most developers I know use. Let's see, what's it like working at UW Medicine? So when I worked on the research side for University of Washington, it was super easy. And I really like working on applications that you only have 100 people using it is great. I worked for startup companies all the time, and now you have millions of users, and there's always new features and new stuff coming on. It's really high paced. Working for like these startups like Robinhood or like TikTok or something, it's really a fast-paced work environment. But when you work for the University of Washington, it's definitely a lot easier, and you got a lot more time for actually living your life than just programming all day. If someone came to you and said they want to edit code so that they can do YouTube, what would you say? I'm assuming that they want to create a new another version of YouTube. And if that was the case, I mean, that's right in my wheelhouse. So PHP, MySQL, absolutely need the JavaScript side. Single page web applications. And I know that sounds weird because it's just a term programmers use when you only load the page once and all the rest is done in JavaScript. Because that way you can, if you do create the next YouTube, you can move right into your mobile application without a lot of effort. So definitely PHP for your backend, MySQL for your database, And I would try to do a lot of that yourself. It's really easy to go on Google right now and start up a Firebase application and use Firebase for your database, use their web servers, use their awesome management apps. But my warning I give to everybody is that if you're successful and you start getting millions of users, that comes with a bill from Google. And so a lot of people get this like, it's like, hey, we got all these users now, and now a $10,000 bill comes in the mail. And it's like, wait, we have a free application. It's like, we don't have the money for that. So that happens. So the more you can do on yourself, if you figure out how to get a Raspberry Pi or your own server at your house and figure out how to port forward from your router, and the more you can do on your own, the better. Even if so I have servers in Iraq, in Tacoma, so that I use my own stuff for my own personal projects. So I can screw up. Like if I write a piece of code that accidentally takes a lot of processing time because I did something wrong, if I'm using Google or AWS, that might end up costing me a ton of money. And so by having your own servers or working on your own machines first and then moving that is a really good thing. How long did it take? A very long time to be successful. I could say I always had a job, and I've always had a job, and I've always had money because I had this skill. But I'd say it took about 10 years to actually start getting traction. I worked most of my careers in startups, so and most startups fail. So I think out of maybe 8 startups, I've had 2 successes. So, but the thing is that if you're the developer and you run your own machines, you have that time to lose. So you take your bets and you take your chances. And if you didn't spend a lot of other people's money, you can do that as many times as you want. And have you ever met anybody famous? Well, so I worked at Amazon when they were in a small building that leaked in Seattle back in 1998. So I had a lot of contact with Jeff Bezos at that time. Trying to think anybody else famous. No, I think that's probably the most famous person I've ever met. That was probably the funnest time to work at Amazon. I wouldn't recommend it now. What would you recommend starting coding with small projects? Yes, absolutely. So the moment you start coding, the moment you know enough to start your own project that actually has customers, do it, because it doesn't have to be successful. So I've taught many people how to code, and this was back in the day. So, web applications aren't as cool anymore, so you might want to do something else. Like one of the persons I taught to code, the moment he could make a website, like a Facebook kind of thing, where you can log in, register, forgot password, change your profile, that kind of thing, he created a paintball website where his friends could jump on and do like pickup paintball games in the Shasta area in California. So, but as soon as you have customers who are relying on a service, you want to create code, like because you want it, like you're doing things and you're making new features and you have people are excited. It really accelerates your learning process if you actually have a real project that people are using. And so you don't have to learn a lot to get that far. It's amazing how little, like I said, it's like this book back here, learning PHP, MySQL, and Java. Just get through that book and you could create a website like that. And you could do the really basic GoDaddy hosting, right? You don't need all these fancy things. Like a lot of the fancy things that are out there are for large institutions like Google, who have thousands of employees and they need those fancy things to keep everybody on the same page. But literally you could start the next Facebook on like your GoDaddy hosting. So would it be better to create games or security systems? I can't tell you that. So games creations is really fun, but it's a lot of work. So, and if you are going to go into games, then that Unity pathway is the best way to go. And I would say before you get to school, before you go to college, or before you go to these boot camps, create a game on your own. It can be as simple or as complex as you want. You can create like a clone of Half-Life or something like that, or just a basic maze game, but create the game, go through the entire process, get a Apple developer account, get a Google Play account, a developer account, and go through the whole process of getting that game into the app stores. And like I said, it doesn't have to be successful, but then you'll know all the questions to ask and you'll get the most out of school that way. Or you'll know exactly where, what you need to learn out of the books you're reading, or what YouTube videos to look up. So go through that process first and see if then you'll know basically how much work has to go into making a game these days. Like the games that are created now take hundreds of people. Not to say you can't do it yourself, but it's a lot of late nights drinking Coca-Cola in front of your computer. So get prepared for that one. Security systems is hard, but it's a whole lot easier than creating games. One of the things about security is that you always have an out. Security is so hard and you always won't have enough resources to do it well. So even if something really goes wrong and bad, you always have an out that, well, if you just did what I told you to do, we wouldn't have this problem. So, the security field is wide open, especially now that, we got state actors involved with hacking our system. So, if someone was trying to hack it, then why not make a fake one? That is part of security. We call them honeypots. So you create a lot of fancy looking systems when people come into if they get in to our remote access server, we might have a server that's called credit cards or whatever. And we know nobody legitimate is accessing that machine. So as soon as somebody tries to access that, we know it's a hacker. So yeah, we call them honeypots and we use them all the time.
Those are really great questions, guys. Do you have any more questions? Type them up in your alpha there. Yeah, thank you. Some of the things you were talking about is exactly what we talk about in class, because we're teaching intro to JavaScript, and then we also have a little bit JavaScript with a little game design, and then we have Python and mobile apps and cybersecurity this year, and web design. So we have a lot to offer. We use the CodeHS platform, which is the online curriculum, and they house the canvas and the code. So basically they make the code work, and we're just learning like the syntax of the code. So that's kind of where we're starting.
The web-based Canvas applications that you can run snippets of code, like that didn't exist when I was learning. So that's cool. I'd say that trying to learn through the web without like a curriculum like you're talking about is really tough. Like when I was learning PHP, there was one place everybody learned PHP from. And actually one person everybody learned PHP from. And nowadays, if you try to like Google, learn PHP, you get so many different answers out there. And a lot of it is old. Learning to do mobile applications from the JavaScript side was so hard because things that would work a year ago just don't work anymore. But the tutorials are up there and they're just old and they don't work. And so you follow something line by line and it just doesn't work because the way Apple does things now just is changed. So it's a lot harder to learn just by Google searching. So when you see these books from Unity and everything like on Amazon, a lot of times you'll see Unity 2020, and it's very important to get the latest version of a book.
Yeah, our mobile apps class, they're introducing the React Native. So it's new to us this year. So we're just starting to get playing with it. But so I picked up on that you said that you use React Native too. I'm like, hey, we're doing that in class. That's pretty cool.
React is the popular kid right now.
Oh, good. Yeah, and learning the code, because I didn't come through school as a coding. When I was in college, we learned Windows 98. And so, Microsoft '03, and we thought that was a big deal. So all of this coding and everything has happened after I started teaching. So, I didn't go back to school. I don't have any like official computer science classes or a computer science degree. So it's just really, like you said, it's all learning and doing, just testing it out. And there's so much information out there. It's so overwhelming to even like, where do you begin? So
yeah, that's why having your own project kind of clears up the clutter, because like you're going to seek out things that you need, and you have a real world example to go off of, and that's the key of what like your own personal projects are. And I don't know anybody who's really good at programming that doesn't have something going on the side, because like if I didn't have my side projects, what I do at work doesn't teach me enough.
okay. So I was thinking too, the work that you do, like through the University of Washington, do they fund like all your projects? Is that kind of where you're?
Yeah, so I'm a full-time employee there. But my group will charge like the principal investigator for the work that I do. Like I'm working on a therapy application right now, and so my department is charging their department for the work that I'm doing.
Okay.
And ultimately it gets funded by either the NIH or another public institution. So mostly taxpayer funded.
All right. There's another question that came up in the question and answer there at the bottom.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Does coding or your job take away from your family time? Well, I don't really have a family except for my girlfriend. So no, but it would if I did. So right now where we're at, even at the University of Washington, because of COVID, there's a lot of COVID related research out there, and it was a lot of rush. So there's a lot of high priority projects. If you can imagine, like we're in a pandemic, and those things you see in the movies, which I thought was really cool, but because the things you would have seen in a movie didn't exist, but like a lot of us were tasked in creating it, like real-time mapping of patients, and as people were getting tested and everything else, so we knew how to backtrace and all that other stuff, and those things weren't even possible. And we had somebody on our team that developed this technology before we even knew we needed it. So it was like right there at the right time. So there's been a lot of work right now at the UW, but hopefully that'll die down soon. Yeah, it's things you spend a lot of time in front of your computer. So and it's really up to you to make sure you have time for yourself. I know some people who do that really well. If you work for a startup company, you have like zero time. When I worked for Amazon in the early days, it was 14-hour days, 7 days a week. But I was single and I could do that. And so that was that. What projects do you want to start with? I think, the best ones to start with is the ones that you're interested in. Pick some, when you're learning, you're always going to do something like you're going to do the example application, which might be a pet shop or something like that. But, like I said, as soon as you can, work on something that you actually want to do, that you think people will value in amongst your friends or people that you work with, that kind of thing. There's a Happy Gamer website, and you can't kick, ban, or remove because they did in a gamer website. You can't because something did. How would you get rid of them? I'm not sure if you can't kick, ban. If you wrote the code, you can pretty much get rid of anybody. Whether that's going into the back end, finding the records in the database and just deleting them. But if your policy says you can't get rid of them, or you're running a really successful website and you're going to get canceled on Twitter because of it, then you have other issues, I guess.
So talk to us about Amazon in the early days. I'm curious, did you guys expect it to explode like it did? I mean, obviously, I suppose, startups, that's your ultimate dream, is for it to just take off. But I mean, were there like plans in place for growth? And I mean, I don't know.
Oh, it was all duct tape and zip ties. Like literally when I said the building leaks, like we had servers in the top room on the top floor of this building. in the worst part of town, and when it rained, it actually would leak onto the servers, and we had to cover the servers with tarps and stuff. But Amazon was lucky enough to be really early and like first to the market with what they were doing. So, you know, investors were just pouring money in. So it didn't really matter how inefficient we were. We just had to grow really fast. So when I started there, they just started video. So they were books and music, and they just added video. And we had no idea where it was going. It just grew organically. And, you know, we were told, I was on the distribution side, we were told we only had to ship boxes, like the biggest box we're ever going to ship is going to be like 2 feet by 2 feet, right? And then suddenly, like the next week, we're selling TVs, and it's like, what? So yeah, so nobody knew. We just were growing fast, and because we had all that investment money, it didn't matter how much money we were losing at the time. So can't really do that these days without somebody giving you a lot of scrutiny about how much money you're losing. But back then, you could just grow, and Amazon, you knew every day we were making more money than the previous day. So
isn't that like the secret of a startup? The secret of a startup is just being at the right place at the right time with the right market, looking at your stuff at that right particular time.
There's a huge amount of luck with startups. There's a lot of people with really great ideas, and sometimes they're just too early. The idea was too good, too far ahead of its time, and then they'll give up on that project, when if they just kept it alive long enough, like 10 years, then the world is ready for it. So it's what we're realizing is that you have to look at what people are doing right now, and figure out what people really need like right now. But if you're trying to go way ahead, it's really hard to get people on board with that.
We just have a couple more minutes. So is there any more questions or?
I think we're good, don't we? Something happened. I can't see where the question came in at.
Yeah, it looks like it's jumping around. I was wondering that.
Yes, I was noticing that too.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I think it was an anonymous attendee was the new one.
Oh, there's different languages to recommend for cybersecurity. Did we talk about that? Like the PHS and.
Well, cybersecurity is going to cross the gambit, but it's really going to be language agnostic. You're going to be thinking about more of concepts like open ports, like GET requests, post requests, session management, a lot of stuff that, is browser based. You're going to be looking at, if you right click on your browser and you go to inspect, you're going to see a lot of what cybersecurity people see. And if you click inspect and then you go to the network and you go to security setting, you're going to find out a lot about how easily websites can get hacked. Because people don't realize that when you're typing your password in a password field and you see those dots, that's not really any type of security. It's just, that's only there to protect somebody from looking over your shoulder and seeing your password, but it doesn't really help from a security standpoint, from somebody hacking you. So there's a lot you can see if you click on that inspect section and you start looking at websites and looking at the network and the sources and stuff. Like you can literally start rewriting the browser-based code in your browser. And like in that hacking application in my security class, it's like change your ID to somebody else. It's like, how do you take over the admin account? And you just because you can mess with those variables on the console. And if you're learning React right now, a lot of those frameworks are browser based. So if there's something that you're letting out, if you're setting variables that are supposed to be secure and you're leaving them in JavaScript, somebody can hack that. So something to think about.
Okay, so I think we're about out of time, and I want to thank you very much for sharing your career with us today. It's very interesting.
Yes, thank you.
And Jolene, do you have anything to add, or we're
Yeah, this was perfect. Like we talked a little bit about it, fits right in with our new computer science pathway and the stories that you shared and just the working on your own, hopefully that'll motivate them. Because I tell them that in school all the time too. You have to do some of this on your own. You can't just expect to get it all from class because it changes, every day. And school's always like 2 steps behind of what actually is happening in the.
I think it's similar to any career. If you go into the market, you're going to be competing with people who love this, right? So if you don't love what you're doing, like if you don't like technology enough to be doing it on your own, you're going to be, when you get to school or when you get to work, you're going to be sitting next to somebody who's loved this stuff and they live and breathe it and they really enjoy it. So it's important, just like any other field, that you really like what you're doing.
Yeah, you have to like your job. You spend a lot of time here. Thank you so much for talking with us today. This was really good. Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you, students, for joining us too. And asking questions. Those are great questions and participating. That made it so much better. Thank you.